Welcome to RSA Conference 2023. It's day 2. We're still in Broadcast Alley, recording live. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. For this session, I welcome John Grancarich. He is the Executive Vice President of Strategy at Fortra. John, good seeing you again.
Good seeing you too, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So the last time we spoke, you had just changed your name to Fortra. So how's it been going?
It's been going great. I think, we built a cybersecurity startup in the middle of what was help systems, and now that startup has become the company. And so with the rebrand, it kind of sealed the deal and made it official that, this is who we are, and really a big part of our identity now is really around Fortra.
Yeah, I think what's amazing when I prepared for that interview is just the number of cybersecurity acquisitions help systems had done building up to this, right? And Core Security was one of the early sponsors of Security Weekly, so there's a long history there with Core Security team. And then you've got all these other acquisitions that you guys have pulled together over the years. And not many people have been able to pull this off. Like when I look at a lot of the big platform plays, you see acquisitions happen, but then you see pieces of them just not be what they were before the acquisition. You guys have preserved that, I think, pretty well in the acquisitions that you've done. And I think that leads into this conversation, which is around security maturity versus operational burden. Because as we were preparing for this, we're seeing the consolidation play in the market, right? We're definitely seeing tighter budgets and the desire of CISOs to consolidate their vendor selections down. And so when you have a company like Fortra that has lots of capabilities, it provides a really good foundation. Let's talk a little bit about how that kind of strategy has led into this consolidation play.
Sure. So when we were putting together the vision and the strategy for Fortra, the first thing that we always do is we talk to the customers, we look at the market. And one of the initial, I think, observations we had was you had these really big mega companies who had a lot of breadth, but not necessarily a lot of depth on the controls and capability side. And then curiously, there was also a lot of best of breed companies who had a lot of depth, but not a lot of breadth. And we kind of saw this space right in the middle. And we thought, well, maybe we can fit right there and do something that's more comprehensive, but a lot deeper than what's out there. We then looked at various product categories. We started to ask ourselves, where could we really develop core competencies, be the best in the world at something? So we had to really focus, and we chose infrastructure protection, data protection, managed services, and security awareness training, and said, if we could bring these together, for the exact reason that you mentioned, right? Having a conversation with a CISO or a security team that says you can work with a single provider across a broader range of solutions and not have to compromise on the depth of the capabilities, that is really kind of what underpinned the vision and the strategy, and so that's really what's kind of pushed us forward all this time.
Yeah, I mean, for years we talked best of breed, best of breed, best of breed. Best of breed is fine when the markets are wide open, budgets are free flowing. Best of breed kind of starts to fall down a little bit when we come into some headwinds like we have in the economy, because now it's like, wait, I got to manage all these vendors. I got to figure out how to piece all these together. I don't have the headcount I used to have to piece it all together. Can I get all of these from a single provider? So your patience, I think, is what's really interesting, is having built the strategy over the past few years, you actually put yourself in a position that I think is different than a lot of other providers in the space, because you wanted the breadth with the depth, and now you have the consolidation story.
We do, and when we talk with security teams, it's interesting, you mentioned the word cost. So there's financial cost, but there's also resource cost, and energy cost, and time cost. And so we really redefined what cost was to look across all those different areas and said, well, how can we solve those cohesively together? When we work with customers today, typically they'll start with us with a single solution, but then once we deliver success, they're always interested in figuring out, hey, well, what else do you guys do? This is working out pretty well.
Yeah.
We're well positioned for that, but that strategy has been years in the making and in the execution.
Yeah, because I think a lot of organizations, the podcast we did yesterday, we pre-recorded it last week, was around closing the skills gap. And there was an interesting debate we had on, is there a headcount shortage, or is it just literally a skills gap shortage, right? Because those are two different problems to solve, right? If it's a headcount problem, well, there's a ton of layoffs in the tech space. We can go find the headcount. I think it's more of a skills gap, like having the skills needed to support these tools are where we're struggling, and therefore that adds a lot of operational burden to the organization to find those resources to pull all this stuff together.
Yep. And with that skills gap comes a lot of inefficiency, right? Because, and it's not, it's not the responsibility of cybersecurity professionals to figure this out. It's really the responsibility of vendors to think more cohesively about how to bring together their capabilities. So one of the things that we're doing on that front is, so we're not going to fix the skills shortage or the resource gap overnight, but what we can do and what we are doing is making it easier to use our products and common design system, common user interface system. Once you learn a single Fortra product, it's easier for a customer to say, well, I already know how to use product A, I can move over to product B, get that breadth across the portfolio, but not have to relearn from scratch. And so we're finding a lot of ways to economize in this difficult environment, I think, for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting strategy, because I think a lot of organizations, a lot of security vendors struggle with that, right? Is integrating a bunch of different technologies with a single look and feel user experience, right? It sounds easy. Jason would say easy, do hard. It is really hard to do. And so it's interesting that you've built kind of that user interface to have that consistent experience.
When we built the strategy for Fortra, we actually thought platform first. And what was interesting was we didn't even have the products at that time, but we saw the long-term opportunity to build the platform. So one of the very first things that we started to invest in was the common user interface, and said, in the future, regardless of what type of security product or control that comes to Fortra, we want it to look, function, interact the same for customers. And at the time, nobody had really done that. So that's what we're moving toward now. So we're beginning to slowly but surely bring the product into that common experience, and it's incredible to see that come to fruition at this point.
Yeah, because the learning curve goes down dramatically. You don't have to train new staff on a whole different interface or a whole different administrative interface. It's just, it's the same.
It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same. And if you think about it, once you've got the unified user experience, behind that experience, you can put really incredible things in place, like machine learning, like centralized threat intelligence. So all this stuff gets powered. It's really complex stuff, but the complexity is pushed behind the scenes. And what we bring to the front is what the teams need to focus on. What is the most important noise, suspicious signal to focus on? And let's help them do their work more efficiently, more productively, and improve that security maturity along the way.
So you talked through kind of where you started: infrastructure, data security, security awareness training, some managed services. I'm a big app user data guy. I think those are security controls that organizations will always have to deal with, right? You've got the data security play. You're doing a little bit with the user on the security awareness side. Where does the strategy take you next? Like, do you go more into the user identity space? Do you start to go after the application side? You've got some device scanning capability already. Like, now that you have the foundation, like, you can go in a few different directions and continue to build out more of this holistic capability.
Yeah, this is kind of the key strategic question for Fortra, right? Which is, do we go broader or do we go deeper? And while we're still working through that conversation, one of the things we have aligned on at the company is, for the categories that we participate in today, those pillars that you talked about, we want to be the best in the world at those, right? And so basically, let's make sure that what we have, we're executing on flawlessly, right? And you mentioned the progress we've made in just a few years' time. You mentioned, it's been difficult for some companies to kind of make that leap. For us, focus is the key. And so we make uncomfortable decisions all the time and say no to things or not yet, so that we can stay focused on really kind of where the core of the business is. And you can't be everything to everybody, but you can absolutely be the best in the world at a handful of things. That's really our focus right now.
Got it. So stay very focused. Make sure you're building, because I think it's the full end-to-end integration that really wins the long game here. Because if the products work very smoothly together and they interact with each other in a very robust way, that by itself has tremendous value for the customer, versus having, oh wait, I can go do that app scanning over there and try to figure out how to tie it in, right? So stay very focused, go depth, only on the few things that really are in your core purview today.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, our view is that the security industry eventually becomes a platform industry, and it'll be, a handful perhaps of companies that are going to be kind of at that table, and that's really where Fortra wants to be, is one of those platform companies that's at the table. But it's not just one company, right? We have to recognize and appreciate that security is so complex, it's so nuanced, it changes so rapidly. So rather than try to just cover everything at a superficial level, let's get really focused, really specific, but really absolutely do a fantastic job of where we're focused on.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. I like the new tech though. So you always got to be like, wait, what's the next thing, right? That you want to do, and that's why, some of these other spaces for me are so interesting, because I can see where long term, as more and more stuff moves to the cloud, right? You've seen this pivot from on-prem infrastructure to now cloud infrastructure, protections, and all the things around applications. And so over time, as you start thinking about building out a more holistic platform, those are areas that come in. That's why I was curious, like, where do you go next? It sounds like you go deeper first, then you figure out what that next pillar of capabilities for Fortra would be.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point about kind of how the landscape, the infrastructure landscape is evolving, and we're in this really kind of fluid world where infrastructure, applications, how people interact with their technology environments is just changing every moment.
Yeah.
And that creates this kind of moving target sort of environment where where's the next risk going to come from? Then, and the answer to the question is you have to really think of it from a business perspective. The landscape might be changing every moment, but where are you going to focus as a business? Where is your critical mass going to be? We have a lot of conversations with organizations, and they come to us, they want to talk about security controls. The first couple of questions we always ask is help us to understand what assets you're most trying to protect and which risks are top of mind for you. And sometimes they're not quite ready for that conversation yet because they're thinking controls first.
Right.
What we're trying to do is bring it back to the business conversation and make sure that we're looking through the right lens, because odds are we've got something that's going to be able to help them materially move forward. Yeah,
it's funny because when we were doing our minimum viable security segment back in January, asset management was like #1 on the list, but it's the one thing most organizations, it's not sexy to talk asset management, right? But without understanding what assets you have to protect, like, how do you know how to protect them? It's like a fundamental step, but yet one that we just have not done a very good job of. And then you talk about understanding the business risks, right? That's the other conversation. As the CISO role has evolved, they're starting to have those conversations at the business level. It's getting the rest of the security team to understand that they're there to support the business. And so you're asking the right questions, which is interesting because not a lot of vendors are asking those questions. They're just like, hey, we've got this thing that solves this problem. You want us because we're the best. Instead of stepping back and saying, no, what are those assets? What are those risks you're trying to do? And then formulate a strategy for what the security program should look like.
We have a lot of conversations with customers, and what we ask them is, if you were presenting to your board of directors today or to your investors, what is it that you would need to be able to tell them? So we think from the result first and work backward from that. And it's not a question they get asked a lot, but it really helps to drive that focus that we're looking for, and it helps us to really kind of plug into a specific place, reduce that sense of overwhelm that they have when they're dealing with, because they're all dealing with that sense of like, oh my gosh, where do I focus next?
Yeah.
Well, we've been taking a much more iterative approach to it, and I think that helps business people, and that includes CISOs and technology leaders, to have those kinds of conversations, and probably most importantly, to build trust with their own stakeholders, and then we position ourselves as a partner on that journey for them.
Yeah, if the CISO wants to have a seat at the table, they have to work very closely with the business. This is a way for them to actually start to have those conversations and then develop a security program with a vendor that can provide lots of capabilities in a much more operationally efficient way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, and when we think about operational efficiency, it's not just technology, it's also things like unified support, unified services, unified account management. Fortra thinks of the experience of security as really an end-to-end experience that goes far beyond technology. So we're really trying to unify and streamline all those elements. The better of a job we do with that, we will absolutely help companies get more mature in their security posture, but also, to your earlier point, make it more cost-effective and efficient to do so.
Yeah, and that's what everybody needs in this economy.
Absolutely.
John, it was an absolute pleasure.
Awesome, thank you, Matt.
If anybody wants to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Fortra RSAC. Stay tuned, we have more interviews coming up.